The wind cut across Red Hollow Station like a promise that winter didn't care who you were or where you came from. Elena Vargas sat on that splintered bench with her back straight and her hands folded over a letter she'd read so many times the creases had started to tear. 24 years old, 1,100 miles from Boston, and absolutely nowhere left to go. The station wasn't much, just a weathered platform, a ticket window with bars across it, and a water tower that groaned every time the wind picked up. Cowboys unloaded freight from the morning train, their boots thudding against the wooden planks. A few townspeople lingered near the general store across the dirt road, pretending not to stare at her. But she felt every glance, heard every whisper that didn't bother staying quiet. "That's her," the one Mackenzie sent back. Can you believe she thought she'd just... Well, what did she expect? Elena kept her face blank. She'd gotten good at that over the years. When you grew up the daughter of a Spanish mother and an Irish father in a city that didn't quite know what to do with you, you learned fast that showing hurt only made people meaner. So she sat there like she had a plan, like she had money, like she wasn't about to walk into that ticket office and beg for credit on a train ride she had no way to pay back. The letter sat in her lap, the handwriting still neat and careful across the page. Dear Miss Vargas, after much consideration, I have decided our arrangement will not be suitable. I trust you will understand. Enclosed is money for your return journey, except there was no money enclosed. Just words. Just rejection dressed up in politeness. She'd come here because James Mackenzie had written her 14 letters over 6 months. He told her about his ranch, about the wide-open land, about how he needed a wife who could read and write and help him build something permanent. He'd sent a photograph, handsome enough, serious-looking, standing in front of a house that seemed solid. She'd written back honestly, told him about her family, her education, even sent her own photograph, knowing full well it might matter to him. Apparently it had. He'd taken one look at her stepping off that train this morning, her dark hair, her skin that wasn't pale enough, her last name that sounded too foreign, and his face had gone cold. He'd handed her the letter right there on the platform, turned around, and left without another word. Didn't even wait to see if she'd read it. The humiliation had hit her in waves. First the shock, then the anger. Then something worse, that terrible sinking certainty that she'd made a mistake so big she didn't know how to climb out of it. Now the sun was sliding lower, turning the sky orange and purple over the mountains to the west, and Elena was running out of time to figure out what the hell she was going to do. She could hear the ticket agent inside shuffling papers. She'd have to go in soon. Try to explain. Maybe he'd let her work off the fare somehow, though she couldn't imagine what kind of work a train station in the middle of nowhere would need from someone like her. You look sad. Elena's head snapped up. A little girl stood maybe 3 feet away, bundled in a coat that was too big for her and patched in at least 4 places. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old with tangled brown hair and eyes that were too serious for a kid. She held a stuffed rabbit under one arm, gray fabric worn nearly white in places, one ear hanging by a thread. Elena blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You look sad," the girl repeated. She said it like it was just a fact, the way you'd say the sky was blue. "Are you waiting for somebody?" "No." Elena's voice came out rougher than she meant it to. She cleared her throat. "No, I'm not waiting for anyone." "Then why are you still sitting here?" It was such a blunt question that Elena almost laughed. Instead, she just looked at this kid, this tiny, fearless kid who apparently didn't know you weren't supposed to talk to strangers sitting alone on benches looking miserable. "I'm figuring some things out," Elena said carefully. The girl considered this. Then she climbed up onto the bench beside Elena, her boots swinging above the ground. She set the rabbit on her lap and smoothed its ears down. "My name's Sadie," she announced. "Sadie Cole. This is Mr. Buttons." She held up the rabbit. "He doesn't talk much, but he's a good listener." Despite everything, Elena felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "Nice to meet you both. I'm Elena." "That's a pretty name." Sadie swung her legs. "You're not from here, are you?" "No, I'm from Boston." "Where's that?" "Very far away." Sadie nodded like this made perfect sense. "My mama came from far away too, St. Louis. Papa says she used to tell him stories about the city lights and the big river, but then she died." Elena's chest tightened. The kid said it so plainly, like she was talking about the weather. "I'm sorry." Sadie shrugged, still swinging her legs. "It was a long time ago. I was 4. I don't remember her much. Just her voice, kinda. And she smelled like bread. We had a real oven then. She paused. Papa says I look like her. That's why he keeps her picture, even though it makes him sad sometimes. Elena didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't good with kids, never had been. But something about Sadie's honesty made it impossible to brush her off. Does your papa know you're talking to strangers? Elena asked. You're not strange. You're just sad. Sadie tilted her head. Papa's sad a lot too. Maybe that's why I noticed. Before Elena could respond, a voice called out from across the road. Sadie! Both of them turned. A man was walking toward them, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat that shadowed most of his face. He moved like someone who'd spent his whole life working outside, all lean muscle and controlled strength. As he got closer, Elena could see the lines around his eyes, the scruff on his jaw, the exhaustion carved into his expression. He didn't look old exactly, just worn down. Sadie, what did I tell you about wandering off? His voice was rough, but not angry, more tired than anything. I didn't wander, Papa. I'm right here, Sadie pointed at Elena. This is my new friend. Her name's Elena, and she came from Boston, and she's sad. The man stopped a few feet from the bench. His eyes, gray, sharp, flicked to Elena, and she saw him take her in with one quick glance. Her travel-stained dress, the worn carpet bag at her feet, the letter still clutched in her hands. I apologize for my daughter, he said. She doesn't always understand about boundaries. It's fine, Elena said quickly. She wasn't bothering me. He looked at her for another moment, and Elena had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she wanted him to. Then he glanced at Sadie. We need to get back before dark. Say goodbye. Goodbye, Elena. Sadie hopped off the bench, still holding Mr. Buttons. Maybe I'll see you again. Maybe, Elena said, though she doubted it. The man nodded at her, a brief, polite acknowledgement, and started to turn away. But Sadie grabbed his hand and whispered something Elena couldn't quite hear. He looked down at his daughter, then back at Elena. You all right, miss? He asked. It was such a simple question. He probably didn't mean anything by it. But something about the way he said it, not suspicious, not pitying, just genuinely asking, made Elena's throat go tight. I'm fine, she lied. He studied her for another second, and she had the unsettling sense that he knew exactly how not fine she was. But he didn't push, just nodded again. Safe travels, then. He walked away with Sadie's hand in his, heading toward a wagon hitched near the general store. Elena watched them go and felt something crack a little deeper in her chest. She sat there until the sky turned from purple to deep blue, until the station agent came out and told her the ticket office was closing, until she had to face the truth she'd been avoiding all day. She had $11 left. A train ticket back to Boston cost $43. The agent was a thin man with spectacles and a mustache that drooped over his mouth. He looked at her with the kind of polite discomfort people get when they know you're about to ask them for something they can't give you. I need to get to Boston, Elena said. I can pay part of the fare now, and I can send the rest once I... We don't do credit, miss. Cash only. I understand, but if you could just... Cash only, he repeated, firmer this time. His eyes shifted away from hers. Company policy. Elena felt her hands start to shake. She clasped them together. Is there work here? Anything I could do to earn the rest? The agent looked uncomfortable. You'd have to ask around town, I suppose, but... He trailed off. But what? He sighed. Look, miss, I don't mean to be unkind, but folks around here aren't exactly welcoming to outsiders, especially not... He gestured vaguely at her, and Elena understood immediately what he wasn't saying, especially not people who look like you. I see, she said quietly. Thank you for your time. She walked out of the station before he could say anything else. The street was nearly empty now, most of the shops closed for the evening. A few lamps glowed in windows. Somewhere a dog barked. Elena stood on the platform with her bag in her hand and no idea where to go. She could sleep at the station, maybe. Wait until morning and try again. But try what? She had no skills anyone here would pay for, no connections, no... Miss Vargas? She turned. The man from earlier, Sadie's father, was standing near the edge of the platform, his wagon loaded with supplies. Sadie sat in the back, half asleep, against a pile of flour sacks. I don't mean to intrude, he said, but Sadie mentioned you might be in a difficult situation. Elena's pride flared up immediately. I'm managing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he glanced at the ticket office, the empty street, her single bag. When his eyes came back to hers, there was something like recognition in them, like he knew exactly what managing looked like when you were lying. My name's Caleb Cole, he said. I run a cattle ranch about 2 hours north of here. It's not much, but it's stable. I could use help around the place, cooking, mending, keeping the books. I can't pay much, but I can offer room and board while you figure things out. Elena stared at him. You don't even know me. No, he admitted. But my daughter seems to think you're all right, and she's a better judge of character than most adults I know. That's not a good reason to invite a stranger to your home. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. Probably not, but I'm asking anyway. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she didn't need charity from some lonely rancher who probably had his own reasons for offering help to a woman with nowhere else to go. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was she did need help, desperately. Just until I can earn enough for a train ticket, she said. Fair enough. And I work for my keep. I'm not a guest. Understood. Elena picked up her bag. Caleb took it from her without asking, not in a way that felt condescending, just practical, and set it in the back of the wagon. He helped her up onto the bench seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled away from Red Hollow Station, Elena looked back once. The platform was empty now. The ticket office dark. The whole place looked like it had already forgotten she'd ever been there. She turned forward and watched the road disappear into the darkness ahead. The ride to Black Ridge Ranch was quiet. Caleb didn't seem like much of a talker, and Elena was too tired to make conversation. Sadie had fallen asleep in the back, her head pillowed on Mr. Buttons. The land opened up around them as they left town, rolling hills giving way to steeper terrain, dark forests pressing in on either side of the narrow road. The stars were brighter out here than Elena had ever seen them in Boston, so thick they looked like someone had spilled salt across the sky. Winter comes early in the mountains, Caleb said eventually. His voice was low, like he didn't want to wake Sadie. Another few weeks and the passes will start closing. If you're planning to head back east, you'll want to do it soon. I understand. He nodded. The work's not easy. I won't lie about that. The ranch has been struggling. Lost some cattle last spring. Debts piling up. It's just me and a couple of hands right now, and we're stretched thin. Why are you telling me this? He glanced at her. So you know what you're walking into. I'm not looking for pity, just being honest. Elena studied his profile in the dim light. There was something solid about him, something that didn't shift or pretend. She'd met enough men who lied with smiles to recognize the difference. I appreciate the honesty, she said. They rode in silence for a while longer. Then Caleb spoke again, quieter this time. Sadie doesn't talk to people much, not since her mother died. She used to be, brighter, more trusting. But grief does things to kids, makes them pull inward. He paused. She talked to you, though. That means something. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The ranch appeared slowly out of the darkness, a sprawling collection of buildings silhouetted against the mountains. There was a main house, a barn, a few smaller outbuildings scattered around a wide yard. Fences stretched out into the night, marking pastures Elena couldn't quite see. It looked lonely. Caleb pulled the wagon up near the house and set the brake. He climbed down, then lifted Sadie out of the back. The little girl stirred but didn't wake, just curled against his chest with her face pressed into his shoulder. I'll show you your room, he said quietly. Elena followed him inside. The house was plain but clean, a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything looked functional, nothing decorative, like someone had built a life here and then stopped halfway through. Caleb nodded toward a door on the left. That's yours. Used to be the spare room. There's a bed, a dresser, a lamp, not much else. It's fine, thank you. He shifted Sadie's weight in his arms. I'll get her settled, then come back and show you where things are. Make yourself at home. He disappeared down the hallway, and Elena stood in the middle of the main room, feeling suddenly, overwhelmingly out of place. What the hell was she doing here? She'd come west looking for a fresh start and ended up at a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere, working for a man she didn't know, taking care of responsibilities she'd never asked for. This wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd packed her life into a single bag and boarded that train in Boston. But then again, nothing had gone the way she'd imagined. Elena walked into the room Caleb had indicated and set her bag on the bed. The space was small but not cramped. A window looked out over the yard. The mattress was thin but decent. She sat down and felt the exhaustion of the last 24 hours crash over her all at once. She'd cried twice in her life. Once when her mother died. Once when her father told her there was no money left for her education. She'd promised herself after that second time that she was done crying over things she couldn't control. She wasn't going to break that promise now. Instead, she unlaced her boots, lay back on the bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until sleep dragged her under. Chipam! The next morning came too early. Elena woke to the sound of voices outside, men shouting instructions, the heavy thud of hooves, metal clanging against metal. She sat up, disoriented, until she remembered where she was. Sunlight streamed through the window. She'd slept later than she meant to. She dressed quickly, smoothed her hair as best she could, and stepped out into the main room. The house was empty, but she could smell coffee, strong and bitter, coming from the kitchen. A pot sat on the stove, still warm. She poured herself a cup and stood by the window, watching the activity outside. Caleb was in the yard with two other men, working on a section of fence that looked like it had been half trampled. He moved with the kind of efficiency that came from doing the same tasks 1,000 times. Sadie sat on the porch steps, still in her nightgown, watching them work while Mr. Button sat beside her. Elena sipped her coffee. It tasted like someone had boiled dirt, but it woke her up. After a while, Caleb glanced toward the house and saw her in the window. He said something to the other men, then walked over. His boots were caked with mud, and there was a streak of something, grease maybe, across his jaw. "Morning," he said when he came inside. "Didn't want to wake you." "I should have been up earlier." "You needed the rest." He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "I'll show you around properly later. For now, if you're up for it, Sadie could use some breakfast. I've been feeding her whatever I can scramble together, but I'm not much of a cook." Elena nodded. "I can handle that." "Good. There's eggs, some bread, a bit of bacon. Help yourself to whatever you need." He drained his cup, set it in the sink, and headed back outside. Elena stood there for a moment, then rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Over the next few days, Elena fell into a routine. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended clothes that had been torn and retorn until they were more patched than fabric. She discovered that Caleb hadn't been exaggerating when he said the ranch was struggling. Half the supplies were low or missing entirely. The books were a chaotic mess of unpaid invoices and missed payments, and the two ranch hands who worked for him looked like they were one bad month away from leaving. But she also discovered that Caleb was a better man than she'd expected. He didn't hover, didn't question her, didn't treat her like she was fragile or temporary. He just gave her space to work and trusted her to do it. When she asked about the accounts, he handed over the ledger without hesitation. When she mentioned the kitchen needed better organization, he told her to do whatever she thought was best. It was strange being trusted like that. Sadie, meanwhile, followed Elena around like a shadow. The kid was quiet most of the time, but every now and then she'd ask questions. Some of them simple, some of them surprisingly sharp. She wanted to know what Boston looked like, why Elena had come west, whether she missed her family. Elena answered as honestly as she could without saying too much. But the question Sadie asked most often was the hardest one. "Are you going to leave?" She asked it the first time while Elena was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table. Asked it so quietly, Elena almost didn't hear her. "Eventually," Elena said, "when I've earned enough for a train ticket." Sadie had nodded, her face carefully blank. "Okay." She asked it again a few days later while they were hanging laundry. Asked it while Elena was teaching her how to fix a torn hem. Asked it every time Elena mentioned Boston, or the future, or anything that suggested she wasn't planning to stay. And every time, Elena gave the same answer. Eventually. But the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore. Because despite everything, despite the isolation, the hard work, the bone-deep exhaustion, there was something about this place that felt different. Something she hadn't expected. It felt real. Not perfect. Not easy. But solid in a way her life in Boston had never been. Back home, she'd always been too much of something and not enough of something else. Too educated for the factory girls, too poor for the society women, too foreign-looking for anyone to take seriously. Here, nobody cared what she looked like or where she came from. They cared whether she could cook a decent meal, whether she could balance a ledger, whether she showed up when she said she would. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. One evening, about a week after she'd arrived, Elena sat at the kitchen table going through the ranch accounts, while Caleb sat across from her, repairing a bridle. Sadie was asleep in the next room. "You've been cheated," Elena said without looking up. Caleb's hands paused. "What?" "This supply contract." She tapped the ledger. "You've been paying 40% over market rate for feed. And this trader?" She flipped back a few pages. "He's been charging you for full deliveries and shorting you by at least a quarter every time." Caleb set down the bridle. His jaw tightened. "You sure?" "Positive. I checked the receipts against the delivery logs. The numbers don't match." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, and Elena saw the exhaustion in his face deepen into something closer to despair. "I'm not good at this part," he said finally. "The business side. I can work the land, manage the livestock, fix just about anything that breaks. But the numbers?" He shook his head. "My wife used to handle all that. She was smart with money, knew who to trust. After she died, I just tried to keep things going the way she had, but I didn't notice when people started taking advantage." Elena closed the ledger. "You notice now?" "Yeah." He looked at her. "Thanks to you. Don't thank me yet. Noticing the problem doesn't fix it." "No," Caleb agreed. "But it's a start." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackle of the fire in the next room. Then Caleb spoke again. "You're good at this. The organizing, the numbers, better than anyone I've hired." "I worked for my father's import business before he lost it," Elena said. "I'm not formally trained, but I know how to read a contract." "Then maybe you should stay longer than you planned." Elena looked up sharply. "What?" "I'm not trying to pressure you," Caleb said quickly. "But if you wanted to stay, even just through the winter, I could pay you. Not much, but more than room and board. And when spring comes, if you still want to leave, I'll make sure you have enough for that train ticket and then some." Elena stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need the help. And because—" He hesitated. "Because Sadie's happier than she's been in 2 years. I don't know if you've noticed, but she smiles now. She talks. She's starting to act like a kid again instead of a ghost." Elena felt something twist in her chest. "I'll think about it," she said. Caleb nodded. "That's all I'm asking." But thinking about it turned out to be harder than Elena expected, because staying meant admitting she didn't have anywhere else to go. Staying meant accepting that the life she'd tried to build for herself in Boston, the plans, the hopes, the careful dreams, was gone. Staying meant starting over in a place that would never be easy, with people who might never fully trust her. And yet, every morning when Sadie climbed up onto the chair beside her at breakfast, chattering about Mr. Button's latest adventure. Every evening when Caleb came in from the fields and asked how her day had been, like her answer actually mattered. Every quiet moment when she looked out at the mountains and felt the weight of the sky pressing down on her shoulders. It felt like something she could build a life around, even if that life looked nothing like what she'd imagined. The decision came 2 weeks later, during the first real snowfall of the season. Elena woke to find the world outside her window transformed, everything covered in white, the fences buried, the mountains disappearing into a pale gray sky. She dressed quickly and went to start breakfast, but when she reached the kitchen, she found Caleb already there, staring out the window with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Roads will be closed by tonight," he said without turning around. "If you're planning to catch a train east, you need to leave today." Elena stood in the doorway, her heart pounding. This was it, the choice she'd been avoiding. She could pack her bag, take the money Caleb had already set aside for her, and leave before the snow trapped her here for the winter. She could go back to Boston, find work, try again. Or she could stay. "I'll need to renegotiate that supply contract," she said. Caleb turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something like hope in his face. "You're staying?" "Through the winter," Elena said. "We'll see what happens after that." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They stood there for a moment, and Elena realized she'd just made the biggest decision of her life without even meaning to. She'd chosen to stay. Not forever. Not yet. But for now, for this one brutal, uncertain winter, she'd chosen to stay. And somewhere deep down, beneath all the fear and doubt and exhaustion, she felt something that might have been relief. Or maybe just the faintest beginning of hope. The snow kept falling for 3 days straight. Elena watched it pile up against the windows, burying the fence posts, turning the world into something unfamiliar and quiet. The ranch hands, 2 men named Cole and Matthias, moved through the white like ghosts, checking on livestock, breaking ice in the water troughs, hauling feed to animals that couldn't forage anymore. Caleb worked alongside them from dawn until well past dark, coming in each night with his face raw from wind and his hands so cold he could barely grip a coffee cup. Elena kept the house running, kept the stove hot, kept Sadie occupied with lessons and stories and small tasks that made her feel useful. But underneath all of it, she felt the weight of what she'd committed to. This wasn't temporary anymore. This was winter. This was survival. And she was in it now, whether she was ready or not. On the 4th day, the snow finally stopped. The sky cleared to a hard, bright blue that hurt to look at, and the temperature dropped so low that the air itself seemed to crack when you breathed it in. Caleb came in that morning looking worse than usual, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed. "Lost 2 head overnight," he said, pouring himself coffee with hands that shook slightly. "Wolves got through the fence on the north pasture." Elena looked up from where she was slicing bread. "Can you repair it?" "Already did, but it won't hold forever. That pack's been hitting us all season." He drank the coffee in 3 long swallows, then set the cup down too hard. "I need to ride into town. Get supplies before the next storm hits. Probably be gone most of the day." "I'll come with you." Caleb turned, surprised. "You don't need to do that. I need to see what we're working with," Elena said. "If I'm going to fix your supply contracts, I should meet the people you've been dealing with." Something shifted in his expression, a mix of relief and wariness. They're not going to be friendly." "I didn't come here for friendly." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we leave in an hour." Sadie appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, dragging Mr. Buttons by one threadbare ear. "Can I come?" "Not this time, sweetheart," Caleb said. "It's too cold, and we'll be moving fast." Her face fell. "But I want to go with Elena." "Elena will be back before supper," he told her. "Matthias will look after you while we're gone." "I don't want Matthias. I want Elena." There was a tremor in her voice that made Elena's chest tighten. She crouched down to Sadie's level. "Hey, I'm not leaving. I'm just going to town for a few hours. When I get back, I'll teach you how to make biscuits. The real kind, not the hard ones your papa burns." "Promise?" "Promise." Sadie considered this, then threw her arms around Elena's neck so suddenly it nearly knocked her over. Elena froze for a second, then carefully hugged her back, feeling the small body press against hers like something fragile and fierce at the same time. When she looked up, Caleb was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. The ride into Red Hollow took longer than Elena expected. The roads were buried under snow, the wagon lurching over hidden ruts and frozen ground. Caleb drove in silence, his face set against the cold. Elena pulled her coat tighter and tried not to think about how exposed they were out here. Just 2 people in a wagon, miles from anywhere, surrounded by white emptiness. "You should know," Caleb said eventually, "what happened with Mackenzie. People heard about it." Elena kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I figured. They talk, make assumptions. It won't matter what the truth is." "It never does." He glanced at her. "You've dealt with this before." It wasn't a question, so Elena didn't answer it like one. "My whole life." They rode in silence for another mile. Then Caleb spoke again, quieter this time. "For what it's worth, Mackenzie's an idiot. Anyone who'd turn someone away for something that shallow isn't worth the air he breathes." Elena felt something warm flicker in her chest, unexpected and dangerous. "Careful, Mr. Cole, that almost sounded like a compliment." "It was an observation." "Still." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. When they reached Red Hollow, Elena felt every eye turn toward them. The town looked smaller in daylight, meaner somehow. The buildings were weathered and crooked, the streets half empty. A few people stood outside the general store, their conversation stopping the moment the wagon rolled past. Caleb pulled up in front of a building with a faded sign that read, Morrison's Feed and Supply. He set the brake and climbed down, then offered Elena his hand. She took it, ignoring the stares. Inside, the store was dim and cluttered, smelling of grain and leather and something vaguely chemical. A man stood behind the counter, heavy-set, balding, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. "Caleb," he said. His eyes slid to Elena, then away. "Didn't expect to see you today." "Need to settle up on last month's order," Caleb said, "and place a new one for winter stock." Morrison pulled out a ledger, flipping through pages with thick fingers. "Let's see here. You still owe $43 from October, $27 from September." Elena stepped forward. "May I see that?" Morrison looked at her like she'd just asked to see his undergarments. "Excuse me?" "The ledger. I'd like to verify the charges." His face reddened. "And who exactly are you?" "She's helping me with the books," Caleb said evenly. "Show her." Morrison's jaw worked, but he turned the ledger around and shoved it across the counter. Elena scanned the entries, her mind calculating quickly. The numbers didn't match what she'd seen in Caleb's records, not even close. "According to this," she said, "you delivered 800 pounds of feed in October, but the delivery receipt Mr. Cole signed shows 600. That's a 200-pound discrepancy." Morrison's face went from red to purple. "Now, wait just a... And the price per pound listed here is 12 cents. The market rate in Denver right now is 8. She looked up at him. "Would you like to explain that?" "I don't have to explain anything to some..." He caught himself, but not before the word almost came out. The air in the room went very still. Caleb's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Finish that sentence, Morrison. See what happens." Morrison swallowed hard. I know what you meant." Caleb placed both hands flat on the counter. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to refund every penny you've overcharged me for the last 6 months, and then you're going to give me a new contract at fair market rates, or I'm going to make sure every rancher in this valley knows exactly how you've been doing business. You can't prove..." Elena pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I can. I cross-referenced every delivery against market prices and actual quantities received. It's all documented. Would you like me to take it to the territorial marshal, or would you prefer to settle this now?" Morrison stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, he grabbed the ledger and started scratching out numbers with shaking hands. They walked out of Morrison's with a refund of $62 and a new contract that would save the ranch nearly 30% on winter supplies. Caleb didn't say anything until they were back in the wagon, but Elena could feel the tension radiating off him. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "Yes, I did. He was robbing you blind. I meant what you risked, standing up to him like that." He looked at her. "People like Morrison, they don't forget." "Good. Maybe next time he'll think twice." Caleb shook his head, but there was something almost like pride in his expression. "You're tougher than you look." "I've had to be." They made 2 more stops. The bank, where Elena renegotiated the terms of a loan that had been bleeding interest, and the freight office, where she secured a better rate on shipping contracts. Each time, the reaction was the same: shock, resentment, barely concealed hostility. But Elena didn't flinch. She'd learned a long time ago that backing down only made people push harder. By the time they left town, the sun was already sinking behind the mountains. Caleb drove faster than before, pushing the horses. Elena could feel the cold settling into her bones. "There's talk," Caleb said suddenly. "About us." Elena pulled her coat tighter. "What kind of talk?" "The kind you'd expect. People saying I took you in for other reasons." He kept his eyes on the road. "Saying you're taking advantage, that I'm a fool." "And what do you say?" "I say it's none of their business." They rode in silence for a while. Then Elena spoke, her voice careful. "If it's causing you problems, I can leave. Once the pass opens, no." The word came out sharper than she'd probably meant it to. He cleared his throat. "I mean, you don't have to do that. Let people talk. They always do anyway." Elena looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the reins just a little too tight. "Why did you really ask me to stay, Caleb?" He didn't answer right away. The wagon rattled over a frozen creek bed, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. Finally he said, "Because, for the first time in 2 years, My daughter is happy. And because I'm tired of pretending I can do this alone. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. Okay, Elena said quietly. Okay? Okay, I'll stay, as long as you need me. Something passed between them then. Not quite trust, not quite understanding, but something close. An acknowledgement that they were both in deeper than they'd planned to be. When they got back to the ranch, full dark had fallen. Matthias met them in the yard, his face grim. We got trouble, he said. Caleb was out of the wagon in seconds. What happened? Someone cut the fence on the east pasture, lost half a dozen head before Cole noticed and drove them back. Could have been worse, but he glanced at Elena, then back to Caleb. Wasn't wolves this time. Fence was cut clean. Wire cutters. Caleb's face went hard. You're sure? Positive. And there's more. Cole found tracks, at least 3 riders, maybe 4. They came in from the old timber road and left the same way. Elena climbed down from the wagon slowly, her mind working. Who would do that? Matthias and Caleb exchanged a look. Vernon Pierce, Caleb said finally. He's been trying to buy up land in this valley for years. Wants to control the water rights. I've refused every offer he's made. So he's sabotaging you instead. Looks that way. Elena felt anger rise in her chest, cold and sharp. Can you prove it? Proving it and doing something about it are 2 different things, Matthias said. Pierce owns half the county. Judges, sheriffs, you name it. He wants something. He usually gets it. Not this time, Elena said. Both men looked at her. What are you planning? Caleb asked. I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Over the next 2 weeks, the attacks continued. Feed was poisoned. Fences were cut. 3 more cattle disappeared. One morning, they woke to find the water pump sabotaged, the mechanism jammed with rocks and debris. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed as bad luck, but together they formed a pattern Elena recognized immediately. Someone was trying to break them slowly. She spent hours going through every document she could find, land deeds, water rights, old contracts. She rode into town twice more, asking questions, making notes, slowly piecing together the extent of Vernon Pierce's holdings and influence. What she found was worse than she'd expected. Pierce didn't just own land. He owned people. The judge who'd ruled on 3 separate water rights cases in his favor, the banker who'd foreclosed on 4 ranches that Pierce later bought for pennies, the freight company that charged competitors triple what they charged Pierce's operations. It was a system, carefully built over years. And Caleb's ranch was one of the last independent operations standing in his way. He won't stop, Elena told Caleb one night. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the house quiet around them. Sadie was asleep. The ranch hands had gone to the bunkhouse. He's going to keep pushing until you either sell or lose everything. Caleb stared into his coffee cup. Then I lose everything. I'm not selling. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw real defeat in his eyes. I'm sorry, Elena. I brought you into a fight that's already lost. It's not lost yet. Look around. We're barely holding on as it is. Another month of this, and we find a way to hit back, Elena interrupted. Pierce thinks he's the only one who can play dirty. He's wrong. Caleb shook his head. I won't do that. Won't become what he is. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying we get smarter. Elena leaned forward. Pierce controls the cattle market, right? He owns the buyers, the freight contracts, the processing facilities. Yeah. So we stop competing in that market. We pivot. To what? Elena pulled out a piece of paper she'd been working on. Horse breeding, freight transport. The mining camps in the Northern Territories are growing fast, and they need reliable supply lines year-round. The big operations won't risk winter runs through the mountain passes. Too dangerous, too expensive. But a smaller operation like yours could. Caleb stared at her. You want me to run freight through Dead Man's Pass in the middle of winter? I want you to do what Pierce can't, what the big ranches won't. There's money there, Caleb. Real money. Enough to pay off your debts and buy you breathing room. It's suicide. Those passes kill people every year. So does giving up. They sat in silence. Outside, the wind howled through the eaves. Finally, Caleb spoke. Even if we could do it, and I'm not saying we can, we don't have the capital. We'd need equipment, trained horses, experienced men. We barely have enough to get through the winter as it is. Then we start small, one run, prove the concept, use the profits to scale up. Elena met his eyes. I know it's a risk, but what's the alternative? Caleb didn't answer. He just sat there, looking at the woman who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago and was now proposing they bet everything on a plan that could get them all killed. I need to think about it, he said finally. Fair enough. But Elena could see the wheels turning in his mind, could see him weighing the impossibility of the plan against the certainty of failure if they did nothing. She went to bed that night not knowing which way he'd choose. The answer came 2 days later when Caleb walked into the kitchen and said, I talked to Cole and Matthias. They're in if you are. So here's my question. Can you really make this work? Elena looked at him, at the hope and fear and desperate determination in his face. I don't know, but I'm going to try. That's good enough for me. They shook hands across the kitchen table, and Elena felt the weight of what she'd just committed to settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. This wasn't just about saving a ranch anymore. This was about proving that people like them, people the world kept trying to push down, could push back. The first step was information. Elena spent a week mapping out every mining camp within a 100-mile radius, cataloging what they needed, when they needed it, and what they were willing to pay. She wrote letters to camp supervisors, introducing herself, explaining the service they were offering. Some ignored her. A few wrote back with interest. One, a man named Dutch Kerner, who ran a silver operation in the high country, sent a telegram that changed everything. Stop. Need medical supplies and winter provisions before pass closes. Stop. Will pay triple rate for guaranteed delivery stop. Respond immediately. Stop. Elena showed the telegram to Caleb. This is it. This is our chance. Caleb read it twice. Triple rate would clear most of our debt. Exactly. But the pass is already starting to freeze. We'd have to leave within the week. So we leave within the week. He looked at her. You understand what you're asking. Dead Man's Pass in early winter. It's not just dangerous, it's near impossible. Men have died trying what you're proposing. Then we'll be the first ones to make it. Caleb shook his head, but there was something almost like a smile on his face. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Maybe both. They spent the next 6 days preparing. Caleb and the ranch hands worked from dawn to midnight, training horses for mountain conditions, reinforcing wagons, assembling supplies. Elena handled the logistics, route planning, supply manifests, backup contingencies for every disaster she could imagine. Sadie watched it all with wide eyes, understanding enough to be scared, but not enough to know she should be. Are you leaving? She asked Elena one night while they were making dinner. Just for a little while. But you're coming back? Elena crouched down and took Sadie's hands. I'm coming back. I promise. Papa promised Mama would come back too, but she didn't. The words hit Elena like a fist. She pulled Sadie close, feeling the little girl's heart beating against her chest. I'm not your mama, sweetheart, but I'm not leaving you. Not if I can help it. Sadie was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, I wish you were staying here instead of going to the mountains. I know, but this is important. It's going to help us keep the ranch. I don't care about the ranch. I care about you. Elena felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes caring about someone meant risking everything to protect what they needed. So she just held her until Caleb called them for dinner. The night before they were set to leave, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario, every disaster that could go wrong. Around midnight, she gave up and went to the kitchen. Caleb was already there, sitting at the table with a lamp burning low. Can't sleep either? Elena asked. He shook his head. Keeps running through my mind. All the things that could go wrong. We've planned for everything we can. I know, doesn't make it easier. He looked at her. You could still back out. Stay here with Sadie. Let me and the boys handle it. No. Elena. No, she repeated firmly. We're in this together. That was the deal. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, My wife used to tell me I was too stubborn for my own good, that I'd rather break than bend. Was she right? Usually. He smiled faintly. But I'm starting to think maybe stubbornness isn't always a bad thing, not when you've got something worth fighting for. Elena felt something shift between them, something that had been building for weeks without either of them acknowledging it. She looked away first. "We should get some rest," she said. "Long day tomorrow." "Yeah." But neither of them moved. Finally, Caleb stood and walked to the door. He paused there, his hand on the frame. "Elena?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for taking this risk, for believing we could do this. Thank you for letting me try." He nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Elena sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the best decision. They left at dawn. The sky was the color of old bruises, heavy with the promise of snow. Caleb drove the lead wagon, with Elena beside him. Cole and Matthias followed in a second wagon, both loaded with supplies carefully wrapped and secured against the weather. Sadie stood on the porch in her nightgown, clutching Mr. Buttons, watching them go. Elena waved until the little girl was just a speck in the distance, then turned forward and didn't look back. The first day of the journey was brutal but manageable. They made decent time through the lower valleys, the wagons holding steady on frozen ground. That night, they made camp in a sheltered canyon, building fires and eating cold beans straight from the can. The second day, the terrain got worse. The pass narrowed, the road climbing steadily into country that felt more like the edge of the world than anywhere Elena had ever been. The temperature dropped until their breath came out in white clouds, and ice formed on the wagon wheels. On the third day, they reached the entrance to Dead Man's Pass. Elena understood immediately why it had earned its name. The pass was a narrow corridor carved between two massive cliff faces, barely wide enough for the wagons to fit single file. The walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, blocking out most of the light. The trail itself was a nightmare, rutted, icy, scattered with loose rock that could send a wheel skidding into the abyss with one wrong move. "Last chance to turn back," Caleb said quietly. Elena looked at the pass, at the dark throat of it disappearing into shadow, and felt fear settle cold in her stomach. "Keep going," she said. They entered the pass in silence. Every yard was a battle. The horses strained against the weight, their hooves slipping on ice. The wagons lurched and groaned, threatening to break apart. Elena's hands ached from gripping the seat, her whole body tense with the certainty that at any moment they'd lose control and plunge into darkness. Hours blurred together. The walls seemed to close in tighter. The cold became something alive, something that wanted to kill them. And then, when they were halfway through, the snow started. Not gentle, not slow. A wall of white that came down like a curtain, erasing the world around them. "We can't stop," Caleb shouted over the wind. "If we stop, we freeze." So they kept moving, blind now, trusting the horses to find the path. Elena's face went numb. Her fingers lost feeling. She couldn't tell anymore where her body ended and the cold began. Somewhere behind them, Matthias yelled something, but the wind tore the words away. The lead wagon hit a patch of ice and skidded sideways, the wheels screaming. Caleb hauled on the reins, muscles straining, and somehow, impossibly, got it back under control. They kept going until Elena's vision started to blur, until she couldn't feel anything anymore, until she was sure they were going to die out here and no one would ever find them. And then the walls opened up. The pass widened, the snow eased, and ahead, through the white, Elena saw the faint glow of lights. The mining camp. They'd made it. They stumbled into the mining camp more dead than alive. Elena couldn't feel her feet anymore. Her hands were locked around the wagon seat like claws, frozen in place. When Caleb tried to help her down, her legs buckled and she would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. His face was gray beneath the ice crusted in his beard, his lips cracked and bleeding. Behind them, Cole collapsed in the snow the moment he set foot on solid ground. Matthias managed 3 more steps before his knees gave out. "Inside," someone shouted. "Get them inside before they freeze to death." Hands grabbed Elena, pulled her toward a long wooden building that glowed with lamplight and heat. She tried to walk, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Everything felt distant, like she was watching it happen to someone else. They dragged her through a doorway, and the warmth hit her like a physical blow. Her skin started screaming as blood rushed back into frozen tissue. She heard herself make a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, And then she was sitting on a bench with blankets piled around her and someone shoving a cup of something hot into her hands. "Drink," a gruff voice ordered. Elena drank. Whatever it was burned going down, but it helped. She blinked hard, trying to focus. The room was full of miners, rough men with weathered faces, all staring at her and Caleb and the ranch hands like they'd just witnessed a resurrection. A big man with a salt and pepper beard pushed through the crowd. "You the ones Dutch was expecting?" Caleb nodded, his teeth chattering too hard to speak. "You're insane," the man said flatly. "Absolutely out of your minds. Nobody runs Dead Man's Pass this late in the season." "We just did," Elena managed to say. The man looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. His eyebrows went up. "You're a woman." Very observant. A few of the miners laughed. The big man's face split into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Dutch didn't mention that part." He stuck out a hand the size of a dinner plate. "Name's Boone. I'm the foreman here. Dutch is up at the main shaft dealing with a cave-in, but he'll want to see you soon as you can stand." Elena shook his hand, feeling returning to her fingers in painful increments. "The supplies, already being unloaded. Your boys did good securing them. Not a thing damaged." Boone shook his head. "I've been working mines for 20 years, seen a lot of freight runners. Never seen anyone make it through the pass in conditions like this." "First time for everything," Caleb said hoarsely. They spent the rest of that day thawing out. The miners gave them a bunkhouse to sleep in, fed them stew that tasted like the best thing Elena had ever eaten, and left them alone to recover. Elena slept for 14 hours straight and woke up feeling like she'd been beaten with rocks. Every muscle hurt. Her face was raw from windburn. Her hands were blistered and swollen. But they were alive. And they'd done it. Dutch Kerner turned out to be a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 50s who ran his operation with military precision. He met with them the next morning in a cramped office that smelled of cigarette smoke and kerosene. "Boone says you came through the pass in the middle of a blizzard," he said, pouring whiskey into 4 glasses. "That true?" "Wasn't much of a choice," Caleb replied. "Storm hit while we were already in. Most people would have turned back. Turning back would have killed us just as dead." Dutch nodded, pushing the glasses across the desk. "Well, you made it. That's what matters. Let's talk business." They spent the next hour negotiating. Dutch needed regular supply runs through the winter. Food, medicine, equipment, everything the camp couldn't produce themselves. The big freight companies refused to risk the mountain routes once snow started, which meant the camp was usually cut off until spring. "You can guarantee monthly deliveries?" Dutch asked. Elena met his eyes. "We can. Even in the worst weather? Especially in the worst weather. That's when you need it most." Dutch studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "She always this confident?" "Usually," Caleb said. There was something almost like pride in his voice. Dutch laughed. "All right, I'll take a chance on you. Monthly deliveries, full payment on arrival, plus a bonus if you beat the schedule." He pulled out a contract. "This work for you?" Elena read through it carefully, checking every clause, every number. It was fair, more than fair. The kind of deal that could save the ranch and then some. "We'll take it," she said. They shook hands, and Elena felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger. The return journey through Dead Man's Pass was less dramatic but no less brutal. They left the mining camp with empty wagons and pockets full of money. Actual money, more than Elena had seen in months. The weight of it felt impossible. "We did it," Matthias said as they prepared to leave. His face was still raw from frostbite, but he was grinning. "We actually pulled it off." "Don't celebrate yet," Cole warned. "Still gotta make it home." "Always the optimist," Matthias shot back. Elena climbed onto the wagon seat beside Caleb. The morning was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. But the pass looked less threatening now, or maybe she was just too tired to be properly afraid. "You ready?" Caleb asked. "Let's go home." They made it through in 2 days this time, the weather holding just enough to give them a window. When they finally saw Black Ridge Ranch rising out of the valley below, Elena felt something in her chest loosen. Sadie was waiting on the porch. The moment she saw the wagons, she started running, just took off across the snow in her boots and coat, moving faster than Elena had ever seen her move. Caleb stopped the wagon and jumped down just in time to catch her. Sadie wrapped herself around him like a vine, her face buried in his neck, and Elena heard her sobbing. "You came back," she kept saying. "You came back. You came back." "Of course I did, sweetheart," Caleb murmured. "Of course I did." Then Sadie pulled away and looked at Elena, still sitting on the wagon seat. "You too. You came back too." Elena climbed down, her body protesting every movement, and Sadie launched herself at her with the same desperate intensity. Elena caught her, stumbled, caught her balance. "I promised, didn't I?" she said into Sadie's hair. The little girl nodded against her shoulder, her small hands fisted in Elena's coat like she was afraid to let go. Over Sadie's head, Elena met Caleb's eyes. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, understanding, something deeper she didn't have words for yet. That night, after the supplies were unloaded and the money counted and secured, after Sadie was finally convinced to go to bed, Elena sat at the kitchen table with the contract from Dutch Kerner spread out in front of her. The numbers were real. The possibility was real. They could do this. They could actually do this. Caleb came in, poured himself coffee, sat down across from her. He looked exhausted but lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted. "I've been thinking," he said. "About? About what comes next. We made one run. Proved we could do it. But to make this work long term, we'll need more horses, better equipment, maybe another wagon. And more men," Elena added. "Cole and Matthias are good, but we can't run this operation with just 4 people." "Agreed. Which means we need capital to expand," he paused. "There's money from this run, but not enough to cover everything we need and pay down the debts." Elena had already thought about this. "We use part of it for debt service, enough to keep the collectors off our backs. The rest goes into the operation. We grow it, run it lean, reinvest the profits." "It's a risk." "Everything's a risk." Caleb nodded slowly. "You know what you're doing, don't you? This business side of things." "I'm learning." "No," he said. "You know, you've got an instinct for it. You see things I miss." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "You're not so bad yourself. You got us through that pass when I was ready to give up." "You never looked like you were giving up." "That's because I was too scared to show it." He smiled at that, a real smile, not the half version she usually got. "Well, you fooled me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice quieter. "Elena, I need to tell you something." She looked up. "When you first showed up at the station, I thought I was doing you a favor, helping someone down on their luck." He met her eyes. "I was wrong. You saved this ranch. You saved me and Sadie. I don't know how to repay that." "You don't need to repay anything. We're partners in this." "Are we?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena realized they'd never actually defined what this was, what they were to each other. Employer and employee didn't fit anymore. Neither did strangers, but partners felt both too simple and too complicated. "I'd like to be," she said finally. "If you'll have me." Caleb extended his hand across the table. "Partners, then." Elena shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Partners. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. Whatever this was between them, it was already more complicated than a business arrangement. She just didn't know if she was ready to admit it yet. The next morning brought trouble. Elena woke to shouting outside. She threw on her coat and ran out to find Caleb standing in the yard with Cole and Matthias, all of them staring at the barn. The doors were wide open. Inside, 3 of their best horses were gone. "Stolen," Cole said grimly, "sometime after midnight. Whoever did it knew what they were doing, took the strongest ones, left the rest." Elena felt fury rise in her chest. "Pierce!" "Has to be," Matthias agreed. "Nobody else would be this bold." Caleb's face was carved from stone. "How'd they get past the watch?" "I was doing rounds," Cole said. "Must have slipped in while I was checking the north fence. I'm sorry, boss. This is on me." "Not your fault," Caleb said, but his voice was tight. "They would have found a way regardless." Elena walked into the barn, studying the empty stalls. The horses they'd taken were the ones they'd just trained for the mountain runs, the ones worth the most money. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were stealing. "This isn't random," she said. This is a message." "What kind of message?" Matthias asked. "That Pierce knows about the mining contract. That he knows we're getting back on our feet." Elena turned to face them. "And he's not going to let it stand." The attack on the horses was just the beginning. Over the next week, sabotage hit them from 3 different directions. Someone poisoned the feed for the remaining horses. They caught it early enough to save most of them, but 2 died in agony before they could do anything. The water pump broke again, this time with the mechanism so thoroughly destroyed it would take days to repair. And someone started a rumor in town that Caleb's ranch was selling diseased livestock, which killed 2 contracts Elena had been negotiating. But the worst came on a Friday night, when Elena rode into Red Hollow to pick up a supply order. She was walking out of the general store when 3 men stepped into her path. She recognized one of them, a ranch hand who worked for Vernon Pierce, a thick-necked man named Garrett with mean eyes. "Well, well," Garrett said, "if it isn't Caleb Cole's pet." Elena kept her voice level. "Get out of my way." "Or what? You'll run crying to your boss?" He stepped closer. "Word is you've been stirring up trouble, making accusations, getting above yourself." "I said move." Garrett's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. "Listen here, you little—" Elena drove her knee into his groin with everything she had. Garrett went down with a sound like a deflating balloon. His friends lunged at her, but Elena was already moving. She'd grown up in Boston, where you learned to fight dirty or you didn't survive. She raked her nails across one man's face, stomped on the other's instep, and when they both recoiled, she ran. She made it to her horse and was mounting when something hit her from behind. She went down hard, the breath knocked out of her. Hands grabbed her, dragged her up. Someone's fist connected with her face and the world exploded into stars. "Enough!" The voice cracked like a whip. The hands released her and Elena stumbled, tasting blood. Through blurred vision, she saw Caleb striding toward them, his face murderous. Behind him were Cole and Matthias, both carrying rifles. "Touch her again," Caleb said quietly, "and I will kill you. That's not a threat. That's a promise." Garrett was back on his feet, bent over but upright. "She attacked me." "I saw what happened. You grabbed her first." Caleb moved between Elena and the 3 men. "Now you're going to walk away. And you're going to tell Pierce that if he wants a fight, he can come to me directly instead of sending his dogs." "Pierce owns this valley," Garrett spat. "You're done, Cole. You and your—" "Finish that sentence," Caleb interrupted, his voice deadly calm, "and see what happens." Garrett must have seen something in Caleb's eyes that convinced him. He backed off, jerking his head at his companions. "This isn't over." "No," Caleb agreed. "It's not." They walked away, and Caleb turned to Elena. His expression shifted from rage to concern so fast it would have been funny if her face didn't hurt so much. "Let me see," he said gently, tilting her chin up. His jaw tightened when he saw the damage. "We need to get you home." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "I've been bleeding before." "Elena." "I said I'm fine." But her voice came out shaky and she hated herself for it. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised her. He pulled her into a hug. Not rough, not presumptuous, just solid and steady, and there. Elena stood rigid for a second, then let herself lean into it. Let herself feel the fear and anger and exhaustion she'd been holding back. She didn't cry. She was still too stubborn for that, but she let herself be held. "This is my fault," Caleb said quietly. "I should have known Pierce would escalate." "This isn't on you. I brought you into this mess." "I chose to stay," Elena interrupted, pulling back to look at him. "I knew what I was signing up for. So stop blaming yourself and help me figure out what we're going to do about it." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or something deeper. "All right," he said. "Let's go home and plan." They rode back to the ranch in tense silence. Elena's face throbbed, her ribs ached where she'd hit the ground, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. But underneath the pain and fear was something else. Rage. Cold, focused rage. Vernon Pierce thought he could intimidate her, thought he could break them with threats and sabotage and hired thugs. He was wrong. When they got back to the ranch, Sadie took one look at Elena's face and burst into tears. It took 20 minutes to calm her down, to convince her that Elena was all right, that the bruises would heal. "Who hurt you?" Sadie demanded. her small face fierce. Some bad men in town. Papa needs to shoot them. Sadie, Caleb started. He does. They hurt Elena, and they need to be punished. Elena crouched down to Sadie's level, wincing at the movement. Your papa's not going to shoot anyone, but we are going to make sure they can't do this again. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Sadie looked at her with those two old eyes. Promise? Promise. After Sadie finally went to bed, Elena sat at the kitchen table with maps and documents spread out in front of her. Caleb, Cole, and Matthias sat around her waiting. Pierce has been buying up land systematically, Elena said, pointing to the map. He owns everything to the east and south. The only thing stopping him from controlling the entire valley's water supply is this ranch, and two others, the Hendersons and the Morgans. The Morgans sold out last month, Cole said. Heard they couldn't take the pressure anymore. Elena made a note. That leaves the Hendersons. Have they been having trouble too? Probably, Caleb said, but Jacob Henderson's too proud to admit it. He hasn't spoken to me in 6 months. Why not? Caleb looked uncomfortable. He thinks I made a mistake bringing you here. Made his opinion pretty clear at church. Elena felt a familiar sting but pushed it aside. Then we need to reach him another way. If Pierce forces them out, we're completely isolated. What are you thinking? Matthias asked. I'm thinking we need allies, and the Hendersons need to know they're not alone in this fight. Jacob won't listen to me, Caleb said. He made that clear. Elena stood up. Then I'll go talk to him myself. That's a terrible idea, Cole said flatly. Henderson hates you worse than he hates Caleb. Probably, but I'm going anyway. Caleb shook his head. Elena, we don't have a choice, she interrupted. If we don't band together, Pierce picks us off one by one. Henderson needs to understand that. And if he doesn't listen? Elena met his eyes. Then at least we tried. She rode to the Henderson ranch the next morning, her face still bruised, her ribs still aching. The property was smaller than Black Ridge but well maintained, the kind of place that spoke of generations of careful work. Jacob Henderson met her in the yard. He was a barrel-chested man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. You've got nerve showing up here, he said. Elena dismounted carefully. Mr. Henderson, I need to talk to you about Vernon Pierce. I don't discuss my business with strangers. I'm not a stranger. I work for Caleb Cole, and Pierce is trying to destroy us both. Henderson's eyes narrowed. That's your problem. It's your problem too. Pierce wants the water rights. Once he gets Caleb's land, yours is next. I can handle my own affairs. Can you? Elena pulled out a folder she'd brought. Because according to these land records, Pierce has been quietly buying up water shares throughout the valley. He doesn't need to force you out if he can just cut off your water supply legally. Henderson snatched the folder, his face darkening as he read. Where did you get this? County records. It's all public information. He's been building leverage for years. Henderson looked up at her, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his expression. Even if what you're saying is true, what am I supposed to do about it? Stop fighting each other and start fighting him. You, Caleb, and anyone else who doesn't want to see this valley owned by one man. Cole brought you here. That shows poor judgment. Elena felt her temper flare. Caleb Cole is twice the man Pierce will ever be. He's honest, he works himself half to death for his family, and he's never cheated anyone in his life. If you can't see that, you're a fool. Henderson's face went red. You've got a sharp tongue for someone in your position. My position is the same as yours. We're both about to lose everything if we don't work together. They stared at each other. Then, slowly, Henderson's expression shifted. You really believe that, don't you? He said. That we can stand against Pierce. I know we can, but only if we stop letting him divide us. Henderson was quiet for a long time. Then he handed back the folder. I'll think about it. Think fast, we're running out of time. Elena rode back to Black Ridge, not knowing if she'd accomplished anything or just made things worse. But at least she'd tried. 2 days later, Jacob Henderson showed up at their ranch. Caleb met him in the yard, his expression wary. Jacob? Caleb. Henderson nodded stiffly. Then he looked at Elena, who'd come out onto the porch. Your woman makes a persuasive argument. She's not my... Caleb started, then stopped. What did she say to you? That we're stronger together than apart. that Pierce is counting on us staying divided. Henderson shifted his weight. I've been a stubborn fool. I let my pride get in the way of seeing what was right in front of me. Caleb extended his hand. We've all been stubborn. Henderson took it, and Elena felt hope flicker in her chest. Maybe they had a chance after all. The alliance with Henderson changed everything, but not in the ways Elena expected. Within a week, 2 more ranchers approached them, the Wheelers and old Thomas Crane, who ran sheep on the western slopes. All of them had the same story: mysterious accidents, sabotaged equipment, pressure from the bank to sell. All of them were barely holding on. Pierce is squeezing the whole valley, Thomas said during a meeting at Black Ridge. He was a weathered man in his 70s, his hands gnarled from decades of work. Started slow years back. Most folks didn't notice until it was too late. They gathered in Caleb's main room, 5 ranchers who'd spent years avoiding each other, now forced together by necessity. Elena sat at the table with her notes spread out, documenting everything they told her. He controls the bank, Jacob Henderson said. Controls the freight lines. Controls the buyers. If you're not selling to Pierce's operation, you're selling at a loss. So we stopped selling to his operation, Elena said. Everyone turned to look at her. And sell to who? Wheeler asked. He was younger than the others, maybe 30, with nervous energy that kept him fidgeting in his chair. There's nobody else. There will be. We create our own market. With what capital? Henderson demanded. We're all broke, in case you hadn't noticed. Elena pulled out the contract from Dutch Kerner. The mining camps are expanding. They need reliable suppliers, food, livestock, equipment, everything Pierce has been controlling. We can undercut his prices and still make a profit because we're not paying his freight monopoly. Thomas leaned forward, squinting at the contract. This is real? Very real, and there are 4 other camps within transport range. I've already sent letters. The room went quiet. Then Wheeler said, even if the camps want to buy from us, Pierce will shut down the freight routes. He owns the rail contracts. Then we don't use the rail, Caleb said. We use the mountain passes. In winter? Wheeler's voice went up an octave. That's suicide. We already did it once, Elena said calmly. We can do it again, and we can train others to do it too. Henderson shook his head. You're talking about completely restructuring how this valley does business. That takes time we don't have. Then we move fast. Elena met each of their eyes in turn. Pierce wins if we give up. He wins if we wait. The only way we survive is if we fight back now, together. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Thomas Crane cleared his throat. My grandson died in Dead Man's Pass 5 years ago, he said quietly. Tried to make a winter run when times got desperate. I swore I'd never risk another life that way. He looked at Elena, his old eyes sharp. But if you're saying there's a way to do it safely, with proper training and equipment, then I'm willing to listen. I can't promise safe, Elena admitted. But I can promise we'll be as prepared as possible. And I can promise that sitting here doing nothing is more dangerous than trying. One by one, the others nodded. All right, Henderson said heavily. What do you need from us? The next 3 weeks were chaos. They pooled their remaining resources, trained men and horses for mountain conditions, and built supply routes that bypassed Pierce's control entirely. Elena worked 18-hour days, coordinating shipments, negotiating contracts, managing logistics that grew more complicated by the hour. Caleb worried she was pushing too hard. He'd find her at the kitchen table past midnight, surrounded by papers, her eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. You need to sleep, he'd say. I need to finish this, she'd reply. Elena, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. The pressure was grinding her down, and she knew it. Every decision felt like it carried the weight of 5 families, dozens of workers, an entire valley's future. One mistake could destroy everything. Sadie noticed too. The little girl started bringing Elena tea without being asked, sitting quietly beside her while she worked. Sometimes she'd fall asleep with her head on Elena's shoulder, and Elena would carefully carry her to bed before going back to the endless pile of contracts and calculations. One night, Caleb caught her crying at the table. She tried to hide it, turning her face away, but he'd already seen. What happened? He asked, sitting down across from her. Nothing. I'm just tired. Elena, she wiped her eyes angrily. I got a letter from Wheeler today. He's pulling out of the alliance. Says his wife is scared, says the risk is too high. Without his contribution, we're short on the capital we need for next month's equipment purchases. Caleb was quiet for a moment. We'll figure it out. How? We're already stretched as thin as we can go. One more setback and... Her voice cracked. She took a shaky breath. I keep telling everyone this will work. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm leading all of you into disaster? You're not. You don't know that. I know you, Caleb said firmly. I know you're the smartest person I've ever met. I know you see possibilities nobody else can see, and I know that if anyone can pull this off, it's you. Elena looked at him through blurred vision. That's a lot of faith to put in someone you barely know. I know you better than you think. He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, and I trust you completely. Something passed between them then, something that had been building for weeks but neither of them had acknowledged. The air felt suddenly charged, dangerous. Elena pulled her hand back gently. I should get some sleep. Yeah, you should. But neither of them moved for a long moment. Finally, Elena stood. Thank you, Caleb, for believing in me. Always, he said quietly. She went to bed that night with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just about saving a ranch or proving she could survive the frontier. It had become something far more complicated, and she had no idea what to do about it. The first major test of their new system came in early December, when the second convoy prepared to leave for the mining camps. This one was bigger. 3 wagons, 8 men, supplies for multiple camps. Elena had coordinated every detail, but she wouldn't be going herself. Caleb insisted she stay back to manage the contracts and communications. Someone needs to hold things together here, he'd said, and that's you. So she watched them leave from the porch, Sadie pressed against her side, both of them silent as the wagons disappeared into the gray morning. The knot in Elena's stomach didn't ease until 5 days later when a rider came back with news that they'd made it through the pass successfully. The profits from that run allowed them to pay down more debt and invest in better equipment. Word spread through the valley that the alliance was actually working. More ranchers started asking questions, wanting to know if they could join, but success brought attention they didn't want. Vernon Pierce had been quiet since the alliance formed, which made Elena nervous. Men like Pierce didn't just give up. They waited, planned, found weaknesses. The weakness came in the form of fire. Elena woke to Sadie shaking her shoulder, the little girl's face white with terror. Elena, wake up! Something's wrong! She was out of bed in seconds, pulling on her coat as she ran outside. The freight barn was burning. Flames rose 30 feet into the air, turning the night orange. Men were already running with buckets, but Elena could see it was hopeless. The building was an inferno. The horses! Someone screamed. Caleb was trying to get the barn doors open, but the heat drove him back. Inside, the animals were screaming, a sound that would haunt Elena's nightmares for years. Without thinking, she grabbed a blanket from the porch, soaked it in the water trough, and ran toward the barn. Elena, no! Caleb shouted. She ignored him, wrapped the wet blanket around herself and plunged into the smoke. The world disappeared into choking darkness. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, could barely tell which direction she was moving. The heat was unbearable, like walking into an oven. Somewhere to her left, a beam crashed down. A horse screamed nearby. Elena followed the sound, her lungs burning. Her hands found a stall door. She fumbled with the latch, got it open, slapped the horse hard on the rump. It bolted past her toward the entrance. Another stall. Another terrified animal. She got 3 horses out before the smoke overwhelmed her. Her knees hit the ground. She tried to stand, couldn't. The blanket had dried out and was starting to smolder. Strong hands grabbed her, lifted her. Caleb's voice in her ear, rough with fear and anger. What the hell were you thinking? He carried her out of the barn just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. They hit the ground hard, both of them coughing, gasping for air. Someone threw water over them, washing away the ash and embers. Elena's throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. Her vision kept blurring, but through the chaos she saw Sadie running toward them, her face streaked with tears. Don't you ever do that again, Caleb said hoarsely. He was still holding her, his arms locked around her like he was afraid she'd disappear. Ever. The horses. I don't care about the horses. I care about you. Their faces were inches apart. Elena could feel his heart hammering against her ribs, could see the fear still sharp in his eyes. For a wild second, she thought he was going to kiss her. Then Sadie crashed into both of them, sobbing, and the moment shattered. They spent the rest of the night watching the barn burn to ash. There was nothing they could do except keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. By dawn, all that remained was a blackened skeleton and the acrid smell of destruction. Cole found the evidence an hour after sunrise. A kerosene can hidden in the brush behind the barn, fresh boot prints leading away through the snow. Arson, he said flatly, holding up the can. No question. Henderson arrived mid-morning with Thomas and several other Alliance members. They stood in a grim circle, surveying the damage. "This is Pierce," Henderson said. "Has to be." "Can we prove it?" Thomas asked. "Doesn't matter if we can or can't," Caleb said. His voice was flat, empty. "The sheriff's in Pierce's pocket. He'll rule it an accident." Elena sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, watching them talk. Her throat hurt too much to speak, but her mind was racing. The barn had held most of their winter freight supplies. The equipment they'd just purchased, months of inventory, gone in one night. They were ruined. Sadie climbed up beside her, pressing close. "Are we going to lose the ranch now?" Elena wanted to lie, to tell her everything would be fine, but she couldn't make herself do it. "I don't know, sweetheart." Sadie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I heard Mrs. Henderson talking to Papa. She said it's your fault, that you made people angry, and now they're hurting us." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. "Do you believe that?" Sadie looked up at her with those serious eyes. "No. I think you're the bravest person I ever met. And I think the people who hurt us are just mean." "Yeah," Elena said quietly. "They are." The Alliance meeting that evening was brutal. They gathered in what remained of Henderson's barn, everyone exhausted and scared. The fire had hit Black Ridge hardest, but the psychological impact affected all of them. If Pierce could do this to Caleb, he could do it to any of them. "We can't keep fighting this way," Wheeler said. He'd rejoined the Alliance after the fire, guilt-ridden. "Pierce has too much power. We're just prolonging the inevitable." "So what are you suggesting?" Henderson demanded. "That we surrender?" "I'm suggesting we face reality. We're small ranchers trying to fight a man who owns half the territory. We can't win." "We haven't lost yet," Elena said. Her voice came out raspy from smoke damage, but steady. "Look around," Wheeler shot back. "We just lost everything." "We lost a barn and some supplies. That's not everything." "It might as well be. We can't make the next mining run without equipment. Without that income, we can't hold the Alliance together. Pierce knows that. He's already won." Elena stood up slowly, her body protesting. Every eye turned to her. "Vernon Pierce hasn't won anything," she said. "He's shown us exactly how scared he is. He's resorting to arson because he knows our alliance works. He knows we're threatening his control, and he's panicking." "You call this panic?" Wheeler gestured at Caleb. "Your barn is ashes." "Yes, because a man who's winning doesn't need to burn down barns. He just waits for his enemies to fail on their own." Elena walked to the center of the group. "Pierce is desperate, which means we're winning, which means we keep pushing." "With what?" Henderson asked, not unkindly. "You're right about Pierce being scared, but Wheeler's right too. We don't have the resources to continue." "Then we find them." "Where?" Elena had been thinking about this all day. There was one option, one desperate gamble that might work, but it would require risking everything they had left on a single, impossible run. "The big camps," she said, "the ones we've been afraid to approach because they're too far, too dangerous. They pay 3 times what the small camps pay. One successful run would give us enough capital to rebuild and continue operations through the spring." The room erupted in protest. "Those camps are 8 days into the mountains," someone shouted. "The passes are worse than Dead Man's," another added. "It's suicide." Elena let them argue, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, she spoke quietly. "You're right. It's dangerous. It might be impossible. But it's the only move Pierce isn't expecting. He thinks he's broken us. He thinks we're done." She paused. "I say we prove him wrong." Caleb had been silent through the entire discussion. Now he stood up. "I'll go," he said simply. Caleb, Henderson started. I'll go, he repeated. It's my ranch that burned. My fight with Pierce. I'm not asking anyone else to risk this. You'll need a crew, Cole said. I'm in. Me too, Matthias added. One by one, men volunteered. Not all of them. Some had families, valid reasons to say no. But enough. Enough to make the run possible. Elena felt emotions surge in her chest. Gratitude, fear, something fiercer she couldn't name. I'm going too. No, Caleb said immediately. Yes. Elena, if something happens to me, someone needs to be here to... To what? Watch everything fall apart. Caleb, I'm the one who made the contacts. I know the routes, the contracts, the camp managers. You need me. What about Sadie? The question hit her hard. Elena hadn't thought about that. If she went and didn't come back, what would happen to that little girl who'd already lost so much? Henderson and his wife will look after her, Elena said, hearing the shakiness in her own voice. They're good people. That's not the same as you being here. I know, but this is bigger than me, bigger than her. This is about whether we survive or not. And I need to be part of that. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Henderson. Will you watch over Sadie if we don't make it back? Henderson's face was grave. You have my word. Then it's settled, Elena said, before anyone could argue further. We leave in 3 days. That gives us time to prepare and gather what supplies we can. The meeting broke up soon after, people drifting away into the cold night. Elena stood outside, breathing the frozen air, trying to calm her racing heart. She heard footsteps behind her. Caleb. You didn't have to volunteer, he said. Yes, I did. Elena, stop trying to protect me, she interrupted, turning to face him. I'm not fragile. I'm not a child. I chose this fight just as much as you did. I know that, but Sadie, she loves you. If something happens to you, it'll destroy her. And if something happens to you, you're her father. That's different. Why? Because you're a man? Because you think you're more expendable than I am? Elena felt anger rising, hot and fierce. I'm so tired of people telling me what I can't do, where I don't belong, what's too dangerous for someone like me. I've spent my whole life hearing that. I'm done listening. Caleb was quiet. Then he said, You're right. I'm sorry. The apology surprised her. What? You're right. I've been treating you like you need protection when you've proven over and over that you're stronger than most men I know. He stepped closer. But that doesn't mean I'm not terrified of losing you. Elena's breath caught. Caleb, I know I don't have the right to say this. I know the timing is terrible and you probably don't feel the same way. But I need you to know, before we risk our lives in those mountains... He stopped, struggling with words. You're not just my business partner. You're not just someone helping me save the ranch. You're... Don't, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. Don't say it, not now. Why not? Because if you say it, and something happens to one of us up there, I won't be able to handle it. They stood facing each other in the darkness, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Finally, Caleb nodded. After then, he said. When we get back, we'll talk about this. When we get back, Elena agreed. If they got back. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. They assembled the strongest horses, the most reliable equipment, supplies for a journey that would push them to the absolute limit of endurance. Elena went over the route obsessively, memorizing every detail, every potential hazard. The night before they were set to leave, she sat with Sadie in the little girl's room. I need you to be brave, Elena said, brushing Sadie's hair. Can you do that for me? Sadie nodded, her lip trembling. When are you coming back? 2 weeks, maybe less if everything goes well. What if you don't come back? Elena set down the brush and pulled Sadie into her lap. Then you're going to stay with the Hendersons, and they're going to take good care of you. Mrs. Henderson is kind. I don't want Mrs. Henderson, Sadie sobbed. I want you and Papa. I want both of you to stay here where it's safe. I know, baby. I know. Elena held her tighter, feeling her own tears threatening. But sometimes we have to do scary things to protect what we love. Your Papa and I, we're trying to make sure you always have a home. That's worth fighting for. I already have a home. Right here. With you. The words broke something open in Elena's chest. She'd spent so long believing she didn't belong anywhere, that she was just passing through, temporary. But Sadie had claimed her. This child, this place, these people, they'd become hers without her realizing it. "You're right," Elena whispered. "This is home, and I'm going to fight like hell to keep it." She stayed with Sadie until the girl fell asleep, then carefully tucked her in and went to her own room. She didn't sleep, just lay in the darkness, thinking about everything that could go wrong, everything they stood to lose. When dawn came, she was ready. The convoy gathered in the yard. 3 wagons, 12 men, 20 horses. Henderson and his wife were there to see them off, along with Thomas and several others from the Alliance. The entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. Elena climbed onto the lead wagon beside Caleb. Behind them, Cole and Matthias managed the other wagons, their faces set and determined. "Last chance to change your mind," Caleb said quietly. Elena looked at the mountains rising in the distance, snow-covered peaks that looked like the edge of the world. "Not a chance," he nodded and took up the reins. They rolled out of the yard as the sun broke over the eastern hills, painting everything gold and red. Elena looked back once and saw Sadie standing on the porch with Mrs. Henderson's arms around her, her small hand raised in farewell. Elena raised her own hand, holding it there until the ranch disappeared from view. Then she turned forward and didn't look back again. The journey to the big camps would take them through some of the most brutal terrain in the territory. Dead Man's Pass would be just the beginning. Beyond that lay higher peaks, narrower trails, weather that could turn deadly in minutes. But they'd come too far to stop now. Vernon Pierce had tried to break them, had burned their barn, stolen their livestock, turned half the valley against them. He'd failed, and now they were going to show him and everyone else who'd ever counted them out exactly what they were made of. The first day was deceptively easy. They made good time through the lower valleys, the weather holding cold but clear. That night, they camped in a sheltered canyon, the men sharing stories around the fire, trying to keep spirits up. Elena sat slightly apart, going over her notes by lamplight. Caleb came and sat beside her. "You should rest," he said. "Can't. Too much to think about." "Elena." He waited until she looked at him. "Whatever happens up there, I want you to know. You changed my life. You changed Sadie's life. You gave us hope when we'd given up on it." "Caleb, don't talk like that. We're coming back." "I know. But just in case, I needed you to know." Elena reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "We're coming back," she repeated firmly. "Both of us. And then we're going to have that conversation you wanted to have. Promise?" "Promise." They sat like that for a while, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Elena finally went to her bedroll, she fell asleep feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope. Tomorrow, they'd enter the mountains. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But tonight, for just a few hours, she let herself believe everything would work out. The mountains tried to kill them on the 3rd day. They were halfway through a narrow passage when the storm hit, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had torn open the sky. Wind slammed into the convoy with enough force to rock the wagons sideways. Snow came down so thick Elena couldn't see 5 feet in any direction. "We need to find shelter," Caleb shouted over the howling wind. "There's nothing here," Cole yelled back from the second wagon. "Just cliff on both sides." Elena's mind raced, trying to remember the maps, the terrain descriptions. There was supposed to be an overhang somewhere ahead, a place where freight runners used to wait out storms. But how far? 100 yards? A mile? In this visibility, they could pass right by it and never know. "Keep moving forward," she called out, "slow and steady. If we stop, we're dead." The next hour was pure survival. The horses panicked, fighting the reins. Ice formed on the wagon wheels, making every turn treacherous. One of the men, a kid named Peter who couldn't have been more than 19, fell off his horse and nearly slid over the edge before Matthias grabbed him. Elena's hands were so cold she couldn't feel them anymore. Her face was raw, her eyes burning from the wind-driven snow. Beside her, Caleb fought to keep the wagon straight, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Then, through the white chaos, she saw it. A dark shape carved into the cliff face, the overhang. "There," she pointed, 30 yards ahead. They made it to shelter with all 3 wagons intact, but just barely. The men stumbled off their horses, half frozen, collapsing against the rock wall. Someone got a fire started with shaking hands, and slowly, painfully, feeling returned to their extremities. "We can't keep doing this," Peter said through chattering teeth. "We're going to die up here." "We're not dying," Elena said, though she felt the same fear gnawing at her. "We just need to wait out the storm. And if it doesn't stop, what if we're trapped here for days?" "Then we're trapped for days. We have supplies. We'll survive." But privately, she knew Peter was right to be scared. They'd already burned through more time than she'd planned for. If the storm lasted too long, they'd miss their delivery window. And if they missed that window, the whole gamble would fail. Caleb found her sitting apart from the others, staring into the storm. He lowered himself down beside her, groaning slightly. "You hurt?" Elena asked. "Just old." He managed a tired smile. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified." "Good. Me too." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind scream past their shelter. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about people always telling you what you can't do. Now's not really the time. Just listen." He shifted to face her. "I grew up being told the opposite, that I had to be strong, had to provide, had to never show weakness or ask for help. My whole life, that's all I heard. Be a man, take care of things. Don't let anyone see you struggle." Elena looked at him, surprised by the confession. "When my wife died," Caleb continued, his voice rough, "I should have asked for help. Should have admitted I was drowning. But I didn't, because that would have been failing. So I just kept going, kept pushing, kept pretending I had it under control. And I almost lost everything because of it. Caleb, then you showed up. This stubborn woman who'd been rejected and abandoned and had every reason to give up, but didn't. You weren't afraid to admit when you didn't know something. You asked questions. You asked for help when you needed it. And you saved my ranch because you weren't too proud to do what I was too proud to do." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you started it. You showed me it was okay to need people, to trust them." He paused. "You showed me what real strength looks like." The storm howled outside their shelter, but Elena barely heard it. "You're giving me too much credit." "I'm not giving you enough." Caleb reached for her hand. "When this is over, when we get back home, I want to talk about what happens next. Not just the ranch, not just the business. Us." "What if there is no us?" Elena asked quietly. "What if we're just 2 broken people who found each other at the right time?" "Then we're still 2 people who care about each other. That counts for something." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to protect herself from the possibility of more hurt. But sitting there in the shelter, with death waiting just outside and everything uncertain, she was tired of being scared. "Yeah," she said, "it counts for something." The storm lasted 36 hours. When it finally cleared, they'd lost a day and a half of their schedule, and the pass ahead was buried under fresh snow that made the route even more dangerous. But they pushed forward anyway, because turning back wasn't an option anymore. On the 5th day, they reached the highest point of the journey, a saddle between 2 peaks where the air was so thin it hurt to breathe. From there, they could see for miles in every direction. Mountains stretched endlessly, white and brutal and beautiful in a way that made Elena's chest ache. "Almost there," Caleb said, reading the map Elena had drawn. "Another 2 days to the camp. If the weather holds." "It will." Elena looked at him. "You don't know that." "No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway." It was such a simple statement, but it hit Elena hard. Choosing to believe. Not because the evidence supported it, not because it was logical, but because sometimes hope was its own kind of strength. "Okay," she said. "I'll choose to believe it too." They descended the eastern slope carefully, the wagons groaning under the strain. The trail here was barely wide enough for a single wagon, with nothing but empty air on one side and sheer rock on the other. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and they'd plunge hundreds of feet to their deaths. But they made it. Yard by yard, hour by hour, they made it. On the 7th day, they saw smoke rising in the distance. The mining camp. Relief flooded through Elena so intensely she felt lightheaded. They'd done it. Against all odds, through storms and terrain that had killed better-equipped crews, they'd actually done it. The camp was bigger than Elena expected. maybe 200 men, dozens of buildings, mine shafts carved into the mountainside like wounds in the earth. When the convoy rolled in, work stopped. Miners came out of buildings, out of shafts, gathering to stare at the newcomers. A barrel-chested man with a red beard approached them. "You the freight crew we've been waiting for?" Caleb climbed down from the wagon. "That's us." Redbeard looked at the wagons, at the exhausted men, at Elena sitting there with frost in her hair and determination in her eyes. "You're late." "We ran into weather," Caleb said evenly. "Weather, huh?" Redbeard walked around the wagons, inspecting them. "Lost any cargo?" "Not a single pound." Redbeard stopped, turned, looked at Caleb with new respect. "You came through the high pass in December?" "Had to. It was the only route that made sense. That route's killed men twice your size. We're harder to kill than we look." Redbeard's face split into a grin. "I like you. Name's Sullivan. I run this operation." He jerked his thumb toward the largest building. "Get your people warm and fed. We'll settle up tomorrow." The camp gave them a bunkhouse and more food than Elena had seen in weeks. The men ate until they couldn't move, then collapsed into real beds for the first time in days. Elena tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind was already moving ahead, calculating, planning the return journey, thinking about what came next. She found Caleb outside, standing at the edge of camp, looking out at the mountains they'd just crossed. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too wired." He glanced at her. "We did it." "We did. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for Pierce to show up, or the weather to turn, or the camp to refuse payment. My brain doesn't know how to process success anymore." Elena understood that feeling intimately. She'd spent so long bracing for disaster that victory felt foreign, suspicious. "Maybe we just accept it," she said. "We won. For once, we actually won." Caleb turned to face her fully. "When we get back, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer before you give it. Caleb, I'm going to ask you to stay. Not as an employee, not as a business partner, as family, as—" He stopped, struggling with words. "As someone who belongs there permanently, with me, with Sadie." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. "You're talking about marriage." "I'm talking about building a life together, whatever that looks like. We barely know each other. 6 months ago, I was a stranger sitting on a bench. And now you're the person I trust more than anyone in the world. 6 months, 6 years, time doesn't matter. What matters is whether you want this too." Did she want it? Elena had spent her entire life not belonging anywhere, always on the outside looking in. The idea of staying, of choosing one place and one person, and building something permanent, it terrified her. But it also felt right in a way nothing else ever had. "Ask me when we get home," she said finally, "when we're not standing on a mountain in the middle of nowhere, when we've had time to think about this without death breathing down our necks." Caleb nodded slowly. "Fair enough." But Elena already knew what her answer would be. She'd known it for weeks, maybe months, without admitting it to herself. She was home. She'd been home since the moment she decided to stay through the winter. Everything else was just details. They left the mining camp 2 days later, their wagons empty, but their pockets full. Sullivan had paid the agreed price, plus a bonus for arriving before Christmas, when supplies were desperately needed. The money was enough to rebuild the barn, buy new equipment, and keep the alliance funded through the spring. The return journey was faster, the wagons lighter and easier to manage. The weather held clear and cold, giving them a clean path through the passes. They made it back to the valley in 5 days instead of 7, arriving on a bright afternoon with the sun turning the snow to diamonds. Henderson met them on the road, riding hard. His face was grim. "We've got trouble," he said. "Pierce made his move while you were gone." Elena's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "He went to the territorial judge, got an order to seize Black Ridge for unpaid debts. Sheriff showed up 3 days ago with deputies, ready to kick Sadie out of the house." Caleb went pale. "Where is she?" "Where's my daughter?" "She's safe. My wife has her, but Pierce is claiming the ranch is his now. He's got men occupying the property." "On what grounds?" Elena demanded. "We've been making payments, forged documents. He claims Caleb signed over collateral that's now forfeit. It's all fake, but the judge accepted it. Of course he did, Elena said bitterly. Pierce owns the judge. Caleb was already turning his horse. I'm going to kill him. Wait, Elena grabbed his arm. We're not doing this his way. We're going to beat him legally. There is no legal way. You just said he owns the judge. He owns the local judge. But this is federal territory. If we can prove fraud, we can go over his head to the territorial court. Henderson shook his head. That'll take months. By then, Pierce will have consolidated his claim. Not if we expose him publicly first, Elena interrupted. Her mind was racing now, pieces clicking into place. Pierce's power comes from secrecy, from people being too scared to speak up. But if we can get enough witnesses to testify, enough evidence to show a pattern of fraud and corruption, the territorial authorities will have to act. You're talking about taking on the most powerful man in the region, Henderson said. With what? Hope and good intentions? Elena pulled out the contract from the mining camp. With this, with proof that we don't need Pierce to survive. With every rancher in this valley who's been cheated and bullied and pushed around standing together and saying enough. Caleb looked at her, and she saw the moment he understood what she was proposing. Not just a fight for his ranch, a fight for the whole valley. That's a war, he said quietly. Yeah, it is. People could get hurt. People are already hurt. The question is whether we're going to keep letting it happen. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm in, whatever you need. One by one, the other alliance members joined them on the road. Thomas Crane, the Wheelers. Families Elena had never met, but who'd heard about the convoy's success and wanted to be part of something bigger than their individual survival. By the time they reached Black Ridge Ranch, they had 30 people riding with them. Not an army, but enough. The ranch looked different with Pierce's men occupying it. Hostile. Wrong. 2 guards stood by the main house, rifles across their chests. More men worked in the yard, already starting to rebrand cattle with Pierce's mark. Caleb started to dismount, but Elena stopped him. Let me talk to them first. Elena. Trust me. She rode forward alone, stopping a few yards from the guards. One of them, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. This property's under new ownership, he said. You need to leave. I need to see the seizure order, Elena replied calmly. You can see it at the sheriff's office. I'm seeing it now, or I'm not leaving. Scarface looked annoyed, but he pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. Elena leaned forward, reading quickly. The document was professional-looking, complete with stamps and signatures, but Elena had handled enough legal papers to spot the problems immediately. This is dated 3 days ago, she said, but it references debts that weren't due until next month. How can the ranch be in default on debts that haven't come due yet? Scarface's expression flickered. I don't know nothing about that. I just follow orders. And the signature, Elena pointed. It's supposed to be from the territorial judge, but Judge Morrison is left-handed, and this signature slants right. It's forged. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Elena raised her voice so everyone could hear. Vernon Pierce fabricated the seizure order. He bribed a local judge to sign off on fraud. And you're here illegally. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and I can prove it. Behind her, the alliance members were spreading out, surrounding the ranch. Not threatening, just present. A show of force without violence. Scarface looked at them, looked at Elena, did the math. He was outnumbered, and he knew it. This isn't over, he said. No, Elena agreed. It's not. But you're leaving. Now. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Scarface jerked his head at the other men. Let's go. This ain't worth dying over. They rode out slowly, Pierce's men retreating while the alliance watched in silence. When the last of them disappeared down the road, a cheer went up. But Elena didn't join in. She knew this was just the opening move. Sadie came running out of the Henderson wagon, her face streaked with tears. She launched herself at Caleb, who caught her and held on like he'd never let go. You came back, Sadie sobbed. They said you weren't coming back, but you did. Of course I did, sweetheart. Of course I did. Then Sadie turned to Elena, her small face fierce. Are the bad men gone? For now, Elena said honestly. Are they coming back? Probably, but we're ready for them this time. That night, they held a meeting in the ranch house. now reclaimed and cleaned of any trace of Pierce's occupation. Every member of the alliance was there, plus newcomers who'd heard about the confrontation and wanted to join. Elena stood at the head of the table with documents spread out in front of her, months of research, evidence she'd been collecting since the day she first realized how deep Pierce's corruption ran. "This is what we know," she began. "Vernon Pierce has systematically defrauded at least 17 ranchers in this valley over the past decade. He's bribed 3 judges, 2 sheriffs, and multiple county officials. He's used forged documents, manipulated land records, and violated federal water rights laws." She held up the papers. "And I can prove every single word of it." The room erupted in questions. Elena answered them methodically, showing evidence, connecting dots, building a case that was irrefutable. "The territorial court meets in 3 weeks," she continued. "If we can present this evidence before then, they'll have no choice but to investigate. And once they start investigating, Pierce's entire operation falls apart." "What's to stop him from destroying the evidence?" someone asked. "Nothing. Which is why I've made copies and sent them to 3 different newspapers, along with the full story. Even if he gets to the courts, he can't stop the press. And once this becomes public, his political protection disappears." Henderson was shaking his head in admiration. "You've been planning this for months." "Since the day he poisoned our horses," Elena confirmed. "I knew we'd eventually need more than just survival. We'd need justice." Thomas Crane stood up. "So what do we do now?" "Now we wait, and we prepare for whatever Pierce throws at us next." Pierce's response came faster than expected. The next morning, armed men rode into Red Hollow and occupied the sheriff's office. Not Pierce's usual hired hands, these were professional gunfighters, the kind you brought in when you needed to make a statement. Word reached the ranch by noon. Henderson brought the news, his face grave. "Pierce is calling it protective measures, says he's preventing lawlessness in the territory, but everyone knows what this really is." "Intimidation," Elena said. "Worse. He's trying to provoke us into a fight. If we respond with violence, he can claim self-defense and bring in the territorial militia." Caleb paced the room, his hands clenched. "So we just let him occupy the town?" "For now," Elena said. "We stick to the plan. The evidence goes to the territorial court in 2 weeks. We keep our heads down until then." But keeping their heads down proved harder than expected. Over the next several days, Pierce's men harassed anyone associated with the alliance. They blocked roads, confiscated supplies, arrested people on trumped-up charges. The valley was becoming a powder keg. Then came the fire. Elena smelled smoke in the middle of the night and ran outside to see flames rising from Henderson's property. By the time they got there, half his barn was gone, and his house was threatening to catch. They fought the fire for hours, everyone working together, but it was clear this was a message. Pierce was escalating. "He's trying to break us one by one," Henderson said, his face blackened with soot, "picking us off until we're too scared to fight back." "Then we don't give him the chance," Elena replied. "Everyone moves to Black Ridge. We consolidate, protect each other." "Turn your ranch into a fortress?" Thomas asked. "If that's what it takes." Over the next 3 days, families moved to Black Ridge Ranch. What started as a business alliance became something more, a community bound together by necessity and mutual protection. Children played in the yard, women organized cooking and laundry, men stood watch in shifts. Sadie loved having other kids around. For the first time since her mother died, she had playmates, noise, life surrounding her. Elena watched her laughing with other children and felt her heart swell. "This is what it should have been," Caleb said, coming to stand beside Elena on the porch. "Not individual families struggling alone, but everyone supporting each other." "Pierce did us a favor," Elena said. "He tried to divide us and ended up bringing us closer together. Still doesn't solve the immediate problem. He's got armed men in town and we're running out of time." Elena had been thinking about that. "What if we don't wait for the territorial court?" "What do you mean?" "The evidence is strong enough to convict him 10 times over. What if we present it directly to the people? Call a public meeting, show everyone what Pierce has been doing, force him to defend himself in the open." "He'll never show up to something like that." "He will if his reputation depends on it. Pierce's power is built on people believing he's untouchable. If we publicly challenge him and he refuses to respond, he looks weak. And if he does show up, we have him in a room full of witnesses where he can't hide behind corrupt judges and hired guns." Caleb looked at her with something like awe. You really think that'll work? I think it's our best shot. They spread word of the meeting carefully, using channels Pierce couldn't easily monitor. Within a week, nearly every resident of the valley knew. Saturday evening, the town hall, public presentation of evidence against Vernon Pierce. All were invited to attend and judge for themselves. The tension in the days leading up to it was unbearable. Pierce's men increased their presence in town, making their threat clear. But people kept arriving at Black Ridge, seeking protection, joining the alliance. The movement Elena had started was bigger than any one ranch now. Saturday came cold and clear. They rode into Red Hollow in a group, safety in numbers. The street was crowded with townspeople, ranchers, miners who'd come down from the mountains. The town hall was packed, standing room only. Pierce was already there, sitting in the front row with his lawyer and several of his armed men. He looked calm, confident, a man who'd won every fight he'd ever been in. Elena walked to the front of the room carrying her box of documents. Her hands were steady, her voice clear as she began. My name is Elena Vargas. 6 months ago, I arrived in this valley with nothing. Today I'm here to show you who really controls this territory and what he's willing to do to keep that control. For the next hour, she presented evidence, documents, testimony, financial records. She showed how Pierce had systematically cheated ranchers out of their land, how he'd bribed officials, how he'd used violence and intimidation to build an empire on other people's suffering. The room was silent except for her voice. When she finished, she looked directly at Pierce. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Pierce stood slowly. His face was calm, but Elena could see the rage simmering beneath. This is all fabrication, lies told by people who are jealous of my success. Then explain these signatures, Elena said, holding up documents. Explain why your land purchases always happen right after mysterious fires or suspicious accidents. Explain why every judge who's ruled in your favor has received substantial donations from your companies. Coincidence and speculation. Then you won't mind a federal investigation? Pierce's lawyer stood up. My client has done nothing illegal. This is a witch hunt. This is justice, someone called from the crowd. It was one of the ranchers who'd lost his land years ago. He stood, shaking. Pierce destroyed my family, ran us off our property, and paid the sheriff to look the other way. He did the same to us, another voice added. Then another, and another. One by one, people started standing, telling their stories. Years of abuse and corruption finally coming to light. Pierce's face went from confident to furious. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. No, Caleb said, standing to block the door. You stay and answer for what you've done. Pierce's men reached for their weapons, but they were outnumbered 50-1. The whole town was on its feet now, surrounding Pierce and his people. For the first time in his life, Vernon Pierce was cornered. The sheriff, one of Pierce's bought men, tried to intervene, but the crowd shouted him down. Someone rode for the territorial marshal, who arrived 2 days later to find the town in open revolt against Pierce's authority. The investigation that followed exposed everything: bribery, fraud, illegal land seizures, conspiracy. Within a month, Pierce was in federal custody facing charges that would put him away for life. His companies were dissolved, his assets seized, his political allies fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The valley was free. The change wasn't immediate or perfect. There were still debts to settle, land disputes to resolve, systems to rebuild. But for the first time in years, people had hope. The alliance that had started as a desperate survival measure became the foundation for a new way of organizing the valley's economy. Black Ridge Ranch became the center of it all. The freight operation expanded, connecting isolated communities, bringing prosperity to places that had been cut off. The horse breeding program Caleb and Elena started became renowned throughout the territory. More importantly, it became home. 3 months after Pierce's arrest, on a spring evening when the valley was just starting to green up again, Caleb found Elena on the porch watching the sunset. I never asked you my question, he said. Elena smiled. I've been wondering when you'd get around to it. He sat beside her, took her hand. Elena Vargas, will you stay? Not as a partner or an employee, but as my wife, as Sadie's mother, as part of this family permanently. Elena had known this moment was coming, had rehearsed her answer 100 times, but now that it was here, all the words disappeared. She just looked at this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd trusted her when she didn't trust herself, who'd shown her what it meant to belong somewhere. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll stay." Caleb's whole face transformed. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Elena felt something she'd never felt before. Absolute certainty. This was right. This was home. They married a month later in a ceremony that brought the entire valley together. Sadie was beside herself with joy, declaring to everyone that she'd finally gotten the mother she'd been wishing for. The celebration lasted 2 days, and Elena had never seen so many people genuinely happy for someone else's success. That night, lying in bed with Caleb's arm around her and Sadie asleep in the next room, Elena thought about the letter that had destroyed her future all those months ago. The rejection that had left her stranded on a train platform with nowhere to go. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything. Now she understood it had been the beginning. Because sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is also the thing that saves you. Sometimes being rejected from the life you thought you wanted is what pushes you toward the life you actually need. She'd come west looking for a fresh start and found something far more valuable. A place where she was needed. People who saw her for who she really was, and the courage to fight for what mattered. The frontier hadn't broken her. It had forged her into someone stronger than she'd ever imagined she could be. And in the harshest corner of the wilderness, surrounded by people who'd been strangers and were now family, Elena finally understood what it meant to be home. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Years later, when Sadie was grown and the valley had transformed into a thriving community, people would ask Elena about those early days, about how she'd survived, how she'd built something from nothing, how she'd taken on the most powerful man in the territory and won. Elena always gave the same answer. "I didn't do it alone. Nobody survives alone. We built this together. All of us who refused to be broken, who chose to stand up instead of backing down, who believed that the people trying to push us down didn't get the final word on who we were or what we could become." She'd pause, looking out at the valley she'd helped save, at the community she'd helped build. The frontier teaches you that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, about finding people worth fighting for and refusing to quit on them, about building something that matters even when the whole world tells you it's impossible. "And love?" someone would always ask. "What did the frontier teach you about that?" Elena would smile, thinking of Caleb, of Sadie, of the life they'd built together against all odds. That love is a choice you make every single day. It's choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, choosing to fight for someone when giving up would hurt less, choosing to build a life together even when you have no guarantee it'll work out. She'd look at whoever asked, her eyes fierce and certain. "The frontier didn't give me love. It taught me I was strong enough to accept it, to believe I deserved it, to fight for it when it mattered most." Because that was the real lesson Elena had learned on the frozen bench at Red Hollow Station, in the burning barn, in the mountain passes that tried to kill her, in every moment when she could have quit but chose to keep going. She was stronger than anyone had ever told her she was, braver than she'd believed possible, worthy of the life she'd fought so hard to build. And sometimes the best revenge against everyone who'd ever rejected you, doubted you, or tried to break you was simply refusing to be broken. Living well. Building something beautiful. Proving them all wrong. Not because you needed their approval, but because you finally believed in yourself enough not to need it anymore. Elena Vargas had come west with nothing but heartbreak and 50 cents to her name. She'd left behind a woman who'd been rejected, abandoned, told she didn't belong. And she'd become someone who'd helped save an entire valley, who'd built a family from broken pieces, who'd turned the worst day of her life into the foundation for the best life she could have imagined. That was the woman she saw when she looked in the mirror now. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole, strong, home. And that was worth everything she'd endured to get there. The end.